So this session we're going to talk about the effects of climate change on the availability and costs of water and on sustaining biodiversity, both of which are important to modern societies. So first we want to think about what are the uses of water, and there really are a lot of different uses of water. We tend to think of direct use or consumptive uses of water. And here we're talking about irrigation for the production of food and fibre, cotton. That uses about 65% of our consumptive use of water. Industry, to generate electricity, food manufacturing and otherwise use about 25%. And perhaps surprisingly that households, you and I, to make a cup of tea or coffee, to run our toilets and have showers, use about 10% of the water. But there's also a big indirect use of water to sustain our ecological systems, maintain our rivers and our lakes, partly to provide environmental amenities and partly to provide things like recreation. And with growing populations and higher incomes, we're demanding more and more of water for the environment. So the story is we really don't have as much water as we like. We have to make decisions. How much goes to irrigation, how much to households, how much to the environment. And so water is a scarce and costly resource. So then we can ask ourselves, how does climate change affect the availability of water? And it does it in a number of ways. As we know, one of the features of climate change is higher temperatures. So that means more evaporation. That means less water from rainfall actually runs into dams. And then when it gets into the dam, larger storage losses. There's more evaporation every year. So if we had roughly the same rainfall but higher temperatures, our dams would fill less often and often we would run out of water. But also, there's an increased demand for water. As we've got that population growing from 7 to 9 billion people around the globe, again, as they have higher incomes, we tend to want to spend a little bit more on water for not only food and having showers, but also for better environmental outcomes. There's also, with climate change, likely to be changes in rainfall patterns. So in some of the middle latitudes, there'll be less water or less rain. So that's less water running into our dams. On the other hand, if we go to the poles and to the tropics, then we might actually expect more water. Also, it's likely that the seasonal pattern of flows is going to change. And so the story, for example, if we were getting much of our water in the winter period, not much evaporation, most of that would run into dams. But if some of that rainfall actually shifted to the summer period and fell in hotter periods, less of that rainfall would actually end up in dams. So that can affect our story. And again, one of the other attributes of climate change is perhaps we're going to get more adverse events, that is more frequent floods and also more frequent and severe droughts. So all of those are going to affect the availability of water against a rising demand. So what are some of the effects of the reduced availability of water? Well, we're going to have to invest in additional and more costly sources of water. Larger and bigger dams, or we have to spend more on desalination and recycling. Now what we know is that these so-called manufactured sources of water, desalination and recycling, cost about 3 to 5 times as much as water collected naturally in dams. And of course there's a little sting in the tail for climate change people of producing desalination and recycled water. They take a lot of energy, and a lot of that energy comes from the burning of fossil fuels. So there's a kind of a double cost sting in that. So less water or more expensive water, we're going to have to lift the price of water. And we're going to have to use other demand inventions like more frequent restrictions on when you can water your garden, and even going through to saying one should only have a shower every once a week. Now, if you're Britain, that might be like going back to the old times. But for most of us, having at least a shower a day is something that we really value. Or, as households, we are going to have to invest in new equipment and technology. So instead of using your old clumsy washing machine that uses, say, 6 or 7 litres per shirt that you wash, we invest in a smarter machine that uses half the amount of water. Now that saves on water, but we've got to buy a new machine, and that's an extra cost. Let's turn now to the question of biodiversity. So society in general values lots of different plants and animals and natural ecosystems. For some, these are direct use values. So from a lot of that diversity of plants, we find all sorts of medicines to beat high blood pressure, cancer, and even some that make us get over depression. A lot of those are found in just the natural diversity. We'd want to protect that. Again, that's maintaining genetic diversity, which is important when we breed new plants to better survive changing climate and maintaining our agriculture. And of course, as we get wealthier, most of us like nice parks and to go to national parks for walks, for boating, all those sorts of things. And of course, ecosystems are very important to maintain the quality of our water, our soil and our air. So a world without any massive national parks and trees would not be a sort of world we'd like to live in. There also are what we call in economics some non-use values of markets. I might not actually want to have a look at the national parks, but I want to have the option to do it. I want to know that it's out there, that at some stage, if my grandkids or my new spouse wants to go for a trip into the natural environment, it's there to do it. Or I might just want to leave it as a bequest for future generations. So what does climate change do to biodiversity? Well, it's basically a threat to its ability to adapt. Can our national parks survive the rapid changes in higher temperatures, changes in rainfall and so on? Well, yes, they can. Throughout our history, we've had cold periods and hot periods, and plants and animals have been able to adapt essentially under the Darwinian laws. But they happened over thousands of years. The sort of changes we're anticipating with climate change will be not thousands of years, but in decades. And so the question is, are these animals and plants going to be able to adapt to this rapid climate change? And again, in historic times, national parks sort of went for the breadth of the Americas or the breadth of Europe. Now, in between our little national parks, we've got big urban areas or big agricultural areas. We've impeded the normal movement north, south, east and west of flora and fauna. So we've made adaptation much more challenging. So what are the costs and threats of the survival of biodiversity? So with the loss of biodiversity, we have the loss of some of those use and non-use values. Less recreation, less diversity to find new drugs or to find new plants that can better adapt to agriculture. Or society is going to have to spend a lot more money and income on bigger and larger investments to protect our biodiversity. So we might have to have larger national parks, and that means taking land out of agriculture or even pulling back some urban areas. We might have to have more connected corridors across different climatics, so linking up national parks. So asking farmers not to grow wheat or rice, but to leave a natural strip of a couple kilometres for animals and plants to freely move east, west, north and south. Or we're going to have to spend much more money with biologists, zoologists and so on, helping to preserve diverse flora and fauna. So whenever they look threatened, we move them around, we help them to breed and sustain themselves. And in general, we probably will have to do some of all of the above. What these mean collectively is that climate change threatens our biodiversity, we value it, and if we want to maintain it, we're going to have to spend more money. And that's an extra cost of climate change.